Darkcast Network, indie pods with a dark side.
Hey, little skeletons. I'm Gina.
And I'm Amber.
And this is Weird True Crime. Today, we are covering the tragic murder of 78-year-old Barbara Olson by two rather surprising suspects.
Who they are may be surprising enough, but when you hear the motive, it will be even more shocking.
After the show, if you like what you've heard, check out our website to see pictures and get caught up on past episodes we've done.
It's not all doom and gloom, though. Join our Facebook group, Weird True Crime Podcast, or follow us on Instagram at Weird True Crime for memes, conversation, and more. Now let's get into today's story.
Barbara Jean Shipman was born on July 2nd, 1934 in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, to Mansell and Eunice Shipman. Those are some old names, for sure, and I love them. After she graduated high school in 1952, she worked with her father at the Chippewa County Co-op Dairy in the office for around 6 months. Over the next couple of years, she attended the Gale Institute in Minneapolis, Minnesota, worked with the teletype messages from across the country, worked for the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, and worked at the Chippewa Motor Freight. On February 27, 1954, she married Wesley Olson in Bloomer, Wisconsin, and they had 3 children together, Joy, Judy, and Stephen. She would go on to work for Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Wisconsin part-time from 1968 to 1979 as a claim approver, and then switched to full-time as a customer service rep from 1974 until she retired in 1996. While enjoying retirement, Barbara was a member of Grace Communion International, where she sang in the church choir. She loved her family very, very much and enjoyed spending time with her grandkids and great-grandkids. She spent some time tracing back her family lineage and even tracked it all the way back to King Edward III of England. Some of her other hobbies included scrapbooking, playing piano, flower gardening, reading, sewing, knitting, quilting, traveling, and watching the Green Bay Packers. She sounds like a wonderful, sweet, caring great-grandmother. She would even volunteer her time to drive elderly people to their appointments. What a sweetheart.
I know.
She sounds like such a gem, honestly.
One of Barbara's daughters, Judy, lived nearby, and Barbara would often stop by for a visit in the mornings. However, on the morning of Tuesday, September 18th, 2012, she didn't show up. Judy noted that it was a little odd, but didn't assume the worst. The following morning, Barbara didn't show up again, so Judy started to get worried. She had called and texted her mother over the next several hours, but there was no response. Unable to reach her via phone, she decided to drive to Barbara's house to check on her since she only lived a few minutes away. Judy lifted the garage door and noted that her mother's car was not there and saw a blanket on the garage floor. As she drew closer to the blanket, she realized her mother's legs were sticking out from beneath it. She called her mom's name a few times, but she didn't move. Judy searched for her cell phone to call 911, but realized she didn't have it and ran to find a neighbor to call 911 for her.
Please send an ambulance and the police. My mother is laying in the garage and there's a lot of blood and there's a blanket over her head. There's a lot of blood.
How did the blanket get over her
I have no idea.
And how old is your mother?
She is 78.
And is she breathing?
I don't know. I can't look. The blanket is over her head and I can't look.
Okay, who's here with you?
Oh, God, the neighbor.
Okay, can the neighbor check if she's breathing?
Oh,
You don't have to go and look. You don't have to go. If your neighbor can just go and check if she's breathing.
Okay, they would like you to check.
Are you sending somebody?
I'm working on it. I need to know if she's breathing.
It was a good thing that Judy didn't lift the blanket and check her mother herself, because she would have had the image of her mother seared in her mind for the rest of her life. Barbara's hands and arms were bloody from what appeared to be defensive wounds, and there was a black plastic bag over her head secured with a black belt. Barbara's head had been crushed and beaten so badly that parts of her face were missing or indistinguishable, and the top part of her head was all but missing.
Oh my God.
Police noticed a blood trail that led from her body through the connecting door from the garage into the house. Barbara was described as peaceful and positive, which didn't leave the investigators with any immediate leads, as no one could think of anyone who could possibly have a reason to harm her.
That's so devastating. Could you imagine not hearing from your mom for a few days and she's just like the sweetest woman who couldn't hurt a fly, and that's what you find? I'm surprised, honestly. You were talking about how long she waited to go over there. I'm surprised she waited that long, considering, I mean, you never know. It's like, well, maybe she's doing something else, but...
Well, yeah, like, because she seemed like she was very independent. She had a lot of hobbies. She had a lot of things that she liked doing. She helped elderly people drive. Yeah, you know, she just had something come up. She had whatever. But yet, when she was starting to not get any response whatsoever...
After an extended period of time. If it had been me, if my mom hadn't answered me for 2 hours, I'd be like, I swear to God, if you don't answer the phone, I'm driving to your house. Yeah. Like, I know you're there, you know?
Yeah. I think for me, her time frame, you know, she went a reasonable amount of time, you know, with someone that was that independent and had so many things going on, so...
Totally. And it may have not been uncommon for her to go a while without answering the phone, especially if she was out volunteering or helping other people. But, and because you know your family and their normal response times, but...
I think the one day that she didn't show up was just like, that's an anomaly, but nothing too out of the norm. And then the second day, that's...
So sad. After some conversations with family members and checking out surveillance footage from nearby businesses, the investigators were led to 13-year-old Antonio Barbeau, aka Tino, and his 13-year-old friend Nathan Pop, also known as Nate. Interrogators sat down with Antonio 2 days after the murder to try to get to the bottom of the brutal killing of his great-grandmother. Initially, Antonio claimed that he hadn't seen his great-grandmother in at least a month or two, and the last time he had been to her house, he had done some yard work. He had told the detectives that he had run away from home on Friday and stayed with Nate over the weekend. Monday, when Nate went to school, Antonio stayed at his house and watched TV all day. Little did Antonio know, they had already spoken to his friend, Nathan Pop, who gave a very, very different version of events. Police went to Nathan's house just hours after Barbara's body was discovered and questioned him at his home with his mother present. After going over the initial story with Nathan, the detectives asked him if there's anything that he wasn't being completely truthful about and to come clean, even if he is covering for his friend. They just wanted to get to the bottom of what had happened and don't want anyone getting into trouble for something they didn't do. Nathan asks if he can write it down, so the interrogators agree and give him a piece of paper. Silence follows except for the sound of Nathan writing and quietly sobbing.
The 9 words that Nate wrote down on the piece of paper were, "He killed his grandma, and I was with him." This prompts the detectives to read him his Miranda rights and officially place him into police custody. Those 9 words, he didn't want to say it out loud in front of his mom. Typical kid.
Yeah, he's just like so devastated. I don't want to admit that I did this in front of my mom. He's more worried about what his mom thinks than the police. Which, yeah, I mean, that's a typical 13-year-old.
The criminal complaint, written by Lieutenant Aaron Wiggin from the Sheboygan Falls Police Department, explains the story of events that led to Barbara's death from the information gathered from Nathan and, later on, Antonio. Nathan claims that when he got home from school on Monday, Antonio mentioned he could kill his grandmother. Nate thought he was just joking, but they got Nate's mother to drive them out to Sheboygan Falls anyway. They told her it was so they could meet up with one of their friends. Before they left, Nathan retrieved a hammer while Antonio got a hatchet that they hid in their clothes. Nate's mother dropped them off about 2 miles away from Barbara's house, so the boys walked the rest of the way. Once they arrived, they entered Barbara's garage through an unlocked side door. Barbara must have heard them make noise out there because she came out to see and asked them what they were doing in her garage and if they were cold. She then tells Antonio that she's going to go call his mom since he was a runaway and had been missing from shelter care since Friday. She tells the boys to come inside and then makes a comment to Antonio, "Don't steal my money." As she turned around to go inside to place the phone call, Antonio struck her with the blunt end of the hatchet in her head, knocking her down to the ground, where he continued to strike her several more times as she raised her arms to try to cover her head, groaning and pleading with them to stop. Nathan says Antonio told him to help, so he hit her twice with the hammer, because he was afraid if he didn't, then Antonio would hit him or something. Antonio, using the blade end of the hatchet this time, hit her again, and it got stuck. It took both of the boys to pull the hatchet out. They realized Barbara was dead, so they tried to load her in the trunk of her car, but were unable to lift her.
When Antonio finally starts telling the truth about what happened that day, his version of the events is a little different than what Nate describes. He says that he at one point had a change of heart and didn't want to go through with it, but did anyway. When Barbara turned her back to go inside to place the call to his mother, Antonio states that Nate nodded to him as an indication to hit her. He says that he did hit her once in the head with the flat end of the hatchet, and she yelled, so he hit her again, but then had to run to the bathroom because he didn't feel good. He says he is pretty sure Nate hit her once or twice as well, and that he was only in the bathroom for about 30 seconds, but when he came out, she was dead. They didn't know what to do, so they were freaking out for about 2 hours. They did try to load her into the trunk of her car, but couldn't, so they tried to drag her back towards the house to take her inside and down to the basement, but were unable to lift her body up over the step that led into the house. According to the criminal complaint, Nathan stated they went through the house taking her purse, loose quarters, and jewelry, including rings, earrings, and a watch, and then fled the house in Barbara's gold 4-door Buick. Nate says they drove to a church and left the car there and walked to Nate's house. While there, they went through Barbara's purse and took out the money, and then just went to sleep for the night. That's so disgusting. They disposed of her purse by throwing it into the sewer. The following day, the boys took the car and parked it at a bowling alley and headed to grab some pizza because Antonio was hungry. No big deal. We just murdered my grandmother and, stole her car and dropped it off, but I'm hungry, so let's go grab pizza. Like nothing happened. Ugh, God. After they enjoyed their pizza at the pizza place, like normal 13-year-olds, they went and purchased some gloves and wipes to wipe down Barbara's car to remove their fingerprints from it. They then left the keys in the car and the jewelry and everything visible in the car in the hopes that someone else might steal the car and end up taking the blame. they ditched the gloves and wipes in some bushes near the bowling alley as well.
I can tell that you did not read through this very good at all, so seeing your reaction in real time as you're hearing the information is great.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, I'm just going to say what I think, because what the fuck? Also, these kids remind me a lot of the Cassie case. With the, oh, well, he told me to do it, or I was afraid if I didn't, he would hurt me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, sure.
It's young juveniles trying to place the majority of the blame on the other person, and yep.
Yeah.
Officer Nicole Schmelter of the Sheboygan Falls Police Department was assigned as the lead officer in executing a number of search warrants. According to her report, a purse was found in the storm drain 3 houses down from Nathan's residence, containing items that positively identified it as belonging to Barbara Olson. Also recovered from Nathan's house were quarters, a gold watch, and blood-spattered clothes, including jeans, shoes, and a t-shirt. When Barbara's vehicle was discovered, they located in the trunk of the car a hatchet and hammer, and a bloodied blanket-like material, including a crocheted throw with what appeared to be bits of human flesh on it.
Oh, God.
In the front seat of the car, there was a school paper with the name Nate written on it.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
On the back seat, a bag of jewelry was found. Nicole also found a small coin purse in the vehicle that matched the pattern and color of the purse they found in the storm drain belonging to Barbara. Another search warrant was obtained, this time for Antonio's locker in the juvenile detention center where he had been placed on Tuesday due to unrelated reasons. Clothes and apparent blood-spattered shoes were seized during this search. They checked the bushes near the bowling alley and located used wipes and bloodied work gloves that aligned with a statement that Nate had previously given. Even though Antonio had initially denied seeing his grandmother, when he started talking, his story aligned pretty closely with what Nathan had confessed to the detectives. The main difference in their stories is that Antonio's story paints a murder scene that is much less gruesome than Nathan's account of the events, and both boys try to place more of the blame on the other. Regardless, according to their stories, there was enough evidence of premeditation, beginning with them retrieving the weapons before Nathan's mother had driven and dropped them off. In the 2-mile walk from where they were dropped off to Barbara's house, they also had a lot of time to change their minds and not follow through. The biggest question, though, remained mostly unanswered. Why?
Nate says that when Antonio had mentioned killing his grandmother and he thought he was joking, it was his idea how to get some money. Money for what, though? It was established that the boys used some of the money stolen from Barbara to purchase the pizza they enjoyed the following day. But around $155 was reported missing, so where did the rest of it go? Pizza and wipes only cost so much, if they used the money to buy the wipes too, that is. The investigators had questioned about drug use, and Antonio had fessed to smoking marijuana in the past, but if they were to test, they wouldn't find any in his system for more recently than a week or so prior. Nathan was the one to admit to purchasing around $145 worth of weed. So they murdered Antonio's grandmother and stole $155 from her to purchase marijuana? Money has been a motive for murder since the beginning of time. Sadly, but such an insignificant amount makes it hard to believe someone could murder their own family member over it. Then again, you have to remember these are 2 13-year-old boys we're talking about here. Their adolescent brains aren't fully developed.
It was also reported that Antonio had been hit by a car at the age of 10 and suffered a concussion. Traumatic brain injuries that occur during developmental years can possibly cause long-lasting changes. Here are some of the changes that can occur. The first one is severe mood swings, which can change the way the patient reacts to certain situations. Flat affect is what is referred to when someone seems less engaged or less interested in their family or in the activities they once enjoyed. This could make them appear that they have no response to emotional stimuli and or could present as a lack of ability to show emotion through facial expressions. Aggressive behavior is another common side effect, and studies have shown that around 30% of traumatic brain injury patients report struggles with anger and aggressive behavior. Some people with a traumatic brain injury can also get fixated on certain thoughts or actions, which is referred to as perseveration. An example could be that they would get scared, angry, or confused when their routine changes, or they could get stuck on a certain topic during conversation and refuse to change the subject. Lastly, it seems that many brain injury patients develop a more self-centered personality after their injury, which can be due to damage to the frontal lobe. During the boys' interrogations, you can hear the emotion in Nate's voice. He is crying when he writes down the confession to the detective, and you hear him sobbing other times throughout the interview. However, during Antonio's recorded interrogation, you can clearly see his lack of emotion and facial expressions throughout the entire thing.
In January of 2013, Antonio entered a plea of not guilty by mental disease or defect, and 2 weeks later, Nathan also entered a plea of not guilty. Antonio's attorney tried to have his trial moved because of the publicity, but his request was denied. 4 months later, in May, Antonio then changed his plea to no contest as part of a deal with the state, allowing him to be eligible for parole in 35 years. What it means to plead no contest is that while you're not admitting to guilt, you accept the conviction and will be treated as guilty in terms of sentencing. Now, only Nathan would actually go to trial, which began on Monday, June 17th of 2013. 2 days later, Antonio Barbeau took the stand to testify against his friend, but not as a part of his plea bargain. He did so voluntarily to describe the role Nathan played in the killing of his great-grandmother. The defense attorney for Antonio had argued that his traumatic brain injury had most likely played a role in his decision to commit the crime. Antonio's grandmother also offered a plea in mitigation, saying that Barbara would have wanted Antonio to not receive a strict punishment so that he could have a chance to be a better person. That's heartbreaking. Nathan's attorney and family argued that Nathan should not be held accountable because he was allegedly developmentally challenged. A family member had stated in a news interview that Nathan believed he would be coming home after admitting to the murder, which indicates that he did not grasp the severity of what they had done or thought about the consequences.
That breaks my heart, though. Like, if he truly thought, like, okay, I'll tell the truth, tell what happened, and then I'll get to go home. Ugh.
It also shows that a 13-year-old does not understand the true consequences of doing something like that. Like, their brains are not developed enough to understand. It's just like, you know, kids think that they're invincible. Kids think, oh, I can do anything. It's fine. There's not going to be any repercussion for that. I don't think that that shows that he's developmentally challenged. I think it shows that he's a child that doesn't understand the way the world works yet.
The judge, Timothy Van Ackeren, disagreed with it all, stating that the crime they had committed was the worst he had encountered in his 24 years on the bench. Quote, "I've not seen anything of this nature, not even close," end quote. To put that into perspective, the last murder Sheboygan Falls had seen before Barbara's death was a murder-suicide 16 years before in 1996. Before that, there was a homicide by strangulation in 1978, and 2 years later, officers responded to a domestic disturbance situation where they encountered a gunman who was ultimately shot and killed by the responding officers. Heinous crimes like this just didn't happen in the peaceful town of Sheboygan Falls. It's also important to note here that, as we went over earlier during the interrogation confession, Antonio admitted that he had struck Barbara a couple of times and stated that Nate had also hit her a couple of times as well. Nathan's account of the killing described a more vicious attack, saying that Antonio had struck her multiple times while he only hit her twice. The medical examiner, Douglas Kelly, who performed the autopsy on Barbara, had testified on the second day of the trial. Images of the gashes and fractures to Barbara's head, face, hands, and arms were shown to the jury. He said, quote, "In examining the head, I found there were at least 18 different injuries or blows. 11 of these have evidence of sharp force, and most of them have evidence of blunt force." End quote. The heartbreaking revelation about the wounds on her arms and hands mean that she hadn't been completely knocked unconscious when she was first struck. So as she laid there pleading for the attack to stop, she knew it was her own flesh and blood that was behind the attack that would end up taking her life. The evidence supports Nathan's claims that she was hit repeatedly, rather than Antonio stating it was only a few times from both of them. And something else that they had mentioned was there was over a total of 27 wounds on her. That's more than them hitting her two times each.
And does that include like the defense wounds they found on her hands and arms?
Yeah.
Oh my. How could you do that to your own family member? I just... On Thursday, June 20th, 2013, after only 2 hours of deliberation, the jury found Nathan Pop guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, party to a crime for his role in Barbara Olson's death. His sentencing didn't happen until Tuesday, August 13th, 2013, where he gave a short apology before he was sentenced.
In court, Pop gave a short apology before he was sentenced.
I just want to say that I'm truly sorry for everything that happened. I truly regret every single thing that happened that day.
He was sentenced to life in prison and will be eligible for parole in December of 2043 at the age of 45. Antonio Barbo was sentenced the day before on August 12th, where he also received life in prison for the same conviction of first-degree intentional homicide. He will be eligible for parole in 2048 at the age of 50. He was unable to get through his statement in court, so his lawyer had to finish it for him. Quote, "I know I don't show my emotions. I myself am not sure why, but that doesn't mean I don't. I took away someone's mother, grandma, sister, friend. I had no right to do so. Because of this one action I decided to take, I've ruined so many lives." End quote.
I know that all children make dumbass mistakes. It's how they learn and grow and mature. I made my fair share of mistakes when I was younger because I wanted to impress someone or I was scared.
Definitely.
I know that I didn't have any cognitive issues like it was expressed Antonio had, but I know for a fact I could never even possibly entertain the idea of harming my grandmother. My mom can tell you, I was annoying when it came to my grandmother, Mama, as I called her. She was one of my absolute most favorite people in the world. Back when I was a kid, we lived out in BFE, and I used to have to ride the bus to and from school every day. It was a bit of a drive. One particular time, I remember the bus coming to a routine stop, and all of a sudden, I heard my grandmother's voice ask if I was on the bus. I lost it and just shouted, "Mama," over and over in my ridiculously high-pitched Minnie Mouse voice I had back then. I all but launched myself into her arms when I saw her at the door to the bus. The bus driver didn't even stop me, as it was very, very apparent that I knew who she was. Stuff like that certainly wouldn't fly today, though.
Yeah, no, not so much.
You know, As of right now, there are 28 states in the U.S. that have banned life without parole for children, which makes it seem that the U.S. is just as on the fence about life sentencing for juveniles like I am. As I said before, kids make mistakes, but not all kids make the conscious decision to commit such a brutal act as Antonio and Nathan did. The whole case is just heartbreaking for both families for many reasons, and I just hope that one day when they are eligible for parole, they can show they have become better versions of themselves and won't continue to make the same mistakes.
My mama lived several hours away, and I didn't get to see her as often as I would have liked. However, she was the sweetest, meekest woman I've ever known, which it sounds like was the case in this situation as well. And I know there is no way in a million years that I would have ever harmed her or even considered bringing harm on her. Mm-hmm. And I have mixed feelings about long-term sentencing for young children to commit violent crimes like this. I mean, in Antonio's circumstance, maybe he did receive this brain injury and it has altered him, which shows me that this is going to be a lifelong issue for him.
Yeah.
And I don't think that releasing him back to public is probably the best idea. If it did have these long-term impacts, like on his brain function and the way that he perceives things, because to me it sounds like there is probably a high chance that he could do something like this again. And we know that the brain isn't fully developed until we're 25. So a 13-year-old like Nate, who doesn't have a brain injury, he's not going to understand the severity or the finality of their actions the way an adult would, which is what we saw when he was saying, I thought I could just go free and go home. Mm-hmm. After I told you what happened. They don't understand the consequences of their actions at that age. But at the same time, if a child has the ability to think up and act on something as gruesome as this, it leads me to believe that there are some underlying issues attributing to those actions. And it's hard for me to believe that even decades in prison would change those basic thoughts and desires. We know that they aren't being rehabilitated, and without the proper mental health support, who's to say they won't be paroled and go on to harm someone else? It definitely sounds like Antonio probably would, and I know I'm kind of just speaking out of my ass there, but we know people that have these kinds of injuries, you don't just get over that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've seen it before in other cases and in serial killers who had brain injuries as children, and it completely altered who they were. But even Nate, if he had the ability to go through with doing something like that, who's to say that he wouldn't do it again without getting the proper mental health in prison?
You know, they said that he was more of a follower and not a leader.
Mm-hmm.
Who's to say he wouldn't
fall in with somebody
follow
else?
Somebody else.
Exactly. And so I totally get why it's easy to see that life without the possibility for parole is such a hot topic when it comes to underage defendants, because there's just so many unknowns in that circumstance, because you just don't know, did they do it because of influence? Did they do it because that's who they truly are? You don't know. I don't know what the right answer is there. But come back next time for another lightened up episode of What the Fuck Wednesday, and get away from this awful nonsense for a little while. So until next week, stay safe.
And make good choices.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, little skeletons. I'm Gina. Let me do it again. My voice just totally went. And this is Weird True Crime. I don't know why the music is upbeat, because
it's fine.
I don't know.
It's fine.
That's just where my brain goes. Okay.
Which is referred to as my brain stopped.
Perseveration.
Thank you.
Just insert mine, perseveration. Allowing him to be eligible for...
He got through eligible that time, at least.
What the fuck is wrong with my... It's just, nothing is functioning properly today.
Which makes it seem that the U.S. is just as on the fence about life sentencing.